This is Bill Neville with the Entrust Group, and welcome to our monthly educational webinar. This one we're going to be talking about investing offshore, your IRA offshore, specifically in Puerto Rico and Colombia. Okay. I muted myself, and I think I unmuted myself. Sorry about that if you didn't hear that. So this is Bill Neville with the Entrust Group, and this month, today we're going to be talking about investing in offshore real estate, specifically in Puerto Rico and Colombia. I'm going to get started with my part, and then we're going to introduce Adrian and Ankita from Lifeafar, who have expertise in investing specifically in those two locations in Colombia and Puerto Rico, and let them take over. As we always do before we jump into the presentation, I want to mention that the Entrust Group, we are a custodian and record keeper of what are called self-directed retirement accounts. So any of the information we present here is for educational purposes only. Entrust, along with Adrian and Ankita, we are not advisors. We encourage you to consult with attorneys, accountants, financial advisors, anybody that in your life that you trust with those kind of decisions, helping you with those kind of decisions before making any investment. So this is what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to go over a little bit about Entrust. What is a self-directed IRA? What are the benefits of self-directing your IRA? Then Adrian and Ankita are going to take over, talk about investing in Puerto Rico and Colombia, and then Q&A. You're free to enter in your questions into the questions box or the chat box anytime you want, and then we will answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So whether they're for me or whether they're for the group with Lifeafar, feel free to enter in the question at any time you want, but we will be getting to them at the end. We will not answer questions in the middle of the presentation. This is me. I've been with Entrust actually 9.5 years, coming up on 10 years in April. My role with Entrust is that I educate people on how to invest in non-traditional assets inside the retirement account. So my title is Business Development Manager, but the way I bring in business, the way I develop business is simply by educating people about the service that my company provides. And I graduated from Pennsylvania State University. A little bit about Entrust. We currently have a little under $4 billion in assets. We hold coming up close to 23,000 accounts. We've been in business almost 40 years. The owner of our company started the company in 1981. So we're coming up on 40 years in business. And one of the big ways that we differentiate ourselves from our competitors is that we provide all account holders a single point of contact. So I'm a business development manager. I have three counterparts in my company. We have different regions of the country, as well as we have certain specific referral partners that we work with. Lifeafar is my referral partner, my investment sponsor that I work with. So anybody who does decide to invest with Lifeafar would open their account under me, and then I would be your point of contact for any questions you have, any help you need. And by me, I also have an associate, Jacob. Between the two of us, we become your single point of contact. So big differentiator between Entrust and other custodians is that with a lot of our competitors, once you have an account established and you have any questions or need any assistance, you're going to call an 800 number and get whoever happens to answer the phone. But with Entrust, you get, again, your single point of contact, which is the business development manager for you and their associate. As far as Entrust, we are self-directed retirement account administrators and record keepers, the Entrust Group, and then we have the Entrust Trust Company that provides all the custodial services. So we provide all the custodial and record keeping services for your retirement account. The majority of our staff has certified IRA service professional designation. That's what CISP stands for. We have offices throughout the United States. I mentioned we have regional business development managers that are located in different regions of the country. We have a national continuing education program. We're the only company in our space that provides continuing education credits and classes for certain professions, realtors, financial advisors, CPAs. We do a lot of in-person events and webinars, although not so much since the coronavirus, but typically, obviously, webinars, we do a monthly webinar, and we do in-person events when the opportunities present itself. And then we have an annual IRA Academy where we actually are the only company who trains our competitors. We train other people from other financial institutions on passing the certified IRA service professional. So we truly are the leading educator in our industries with, having been the only company that has those designations. What's the benefits of self-directing your IRA? Well, you get to take control of your investment. So instead of relying on a broker or a financial advisor to tell you what fund or what stock is the best thing to invest in, if you do your own due diligence and you're interested in investing in real estate or potentially offshore or investing in a startup company or doing promissory notes, or the list is endless. If you have the knowledge and the expertise, or you're educating yourself about those different alternative investments, excuse me, then you have the option of investing in those types of assets within a self-directed retirement account. And allows you to diversify. Again, instead of just being limited to publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, it gives you the opportunity to diversify outside of that. And then obviously with a self-directed IRA, it's still an IRA, so you get the tax benefits. If it's a Roth IRA, it grows tax-free. If it's a traditional IRA, it grows tax-deferred. So any rental income from a property or any dividend that gets created by a private placement investment, it all gets paid directly to the retirement account. So it's sheltered and tax protected by the fact that the investment is held inside your retirement account. That's my part until we get to the end and we get to the Q&A, and then you'll hear me again. But at this point, I'm going to pass over the control and allow Adrian and Ankita to introduce themselves and start their presentation about exactly what it says. They're investing overseas through your IRA, Puerto Rico and Colombia specifically. And I just want to thank Adrian and Ankita from Lifeafar for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. So, let's just see if I can get this moving. There we go. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Adrian Beales. In case you can't tell from my accent, I'm an Australian. I've been living and working now in Medellin, Colombia and Bogota, Colombia for 3 years. Also, I've spent a fair bit of time working in Puerto Rico. Originally, I'm from Victoria, Australia. In Australia, I worked in a variety of different roles, but from a personal perspective, I was a real estate investor, mainly investing in single family homes. And mid-30s, I just decided that I wanted to move to Latin America, having traveled to Colombia several times and falling in love with the country and the culture and seeing some opportunities there. And I joined the business about 3 years ago and began my investing journey in Latin America. So hopefully today we can tell you a little bit about our own personal experiences, as well as some of the pitfalls you might come across investing in these two countries.
Hi, I'm Ankita Jain. I'm a senior associate at Lifeafar. I am currently based out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and work primarily on the acquisition and development team for new markets. I recently graduated from Harvard University in real estate finance and development, and my past experience as a project developer in international emerging markets attracted me to the potential the Puerto Rico real estate market has. And since then, I've been working with Lifeafar.
Thanks, Ankita. So we're going to cover initially Puerto Rico. We're going to talk a little bit about the real estate market in Puerto Rico, some of the things that you will find there that's different to, say, the mainland US. Let's see if I get this slide to move forward. There we go. Ankita is predominantly going to cover Puerto Rico as she's based there, but I'll also come in with some stories that I have from Puerto Rico from my time there. I'll predominantly cover Colombia, and obviously please keep the questions coming in and we'll get to them at the end. Interestingly, Ankita, before we get into Puerto Rico, so Ankita, we actually met at our second conference in Puerto Rico, and you had a really interesting thesis that you were doing in Puerto Rico, and that's what originally took you there, correct?
Correct. So I was working on my final thesis, which was focused on for-profit real estate investments in post-disaster areas. I started my research in Houston after Hurricane Harvey, but after Hurricane Maria hit, looking at the landscape of Puerto Rico and the opportunities it had to become a top travel destination, I shifted my attention to Puerto Rico and learned a lot about the tax incentives there and how it was attracting all the investments.
With the slide. Oh, on 1, 2, 4. There we go. So Ankita, do you want to just give us a little bit of a Puerto Rico overview, just for those who don't know the island very well?
Sure. So Puerto Rico is a US territory with around a population of 3 million. The island has been getting a lot of recognition in the last 2 years, not only as a top destination within US to travel, but also a place to live and invest. The island essentially has 2 international airports and is one of the busiest ports in the Caribbean and Latin America. There are major cities here are San Juan, Guaynabo, Mayagüez, and Rincon, where most of the population is concentrated, including the commercial hub being in San Juan. Moving on to the real estate markets, the housing market in Puerto Rico has been growing over the last 2 years, mainly because of the different tax incentives provided, which we're going to discuss later. Though a higher concentration of the new development is focused in San Juan, many people are starting to buy properties outside of the city. 2 examples would be Dorado and Palmas del Mar. Dorado is a wealthy neighborhood where Ritz-Carlton Reserve and the Hilton are located. It has a gated community, which is just 40 minutes away from the city. Palmas del Mar is another such neighborhood known mainly for its golfing communities and is attracting a lot of investments for second homes over there.
So there's some interesting points you've got on here, Ankita, about the 55% of housing on the island is informal. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So after Maria, I'm sure all of y'all saw pictures in the newspaper with, or in the news with a lot of tarps over housing, and a lot of the conversation was about the number of houses which were affected because of the hurricane. But interesting fact to know about is most of the houses which were affected were built illegally and without any construction building codes. So after the hurricane, an association was formed here known as the Puerto Rican Builders Association. And since then, they've done a great job in regulating all new constructions and renovations and making sure that the properties follow international building codes and can last earthquakes, hurricanes, storms, etc.
So it's really interesting. I remember when I first met the ex-president of the Puerto Rico Builders Association, and it was speaking at I believe our second conference there on the island, and he mentioned that 98.5% of the buildings that were built to code had little to no damage from the hurricane. You know, like hurricanes that go to Florida. Obviously here in Australia, where I'm from originally, we have bushfires, lots of natural disasters, but basically many of the buildings that were built to code remained intact and often needed a cleanup, but they were okay. Unfortunately, there was a large amount of informal housing, and the Builders Association has done a great job at ensuring that all renovation projects as well as all new builds are now built to that international standard that you'd get in mainland USA, in the UK, in Canada, and all around the world, because hurricanes are part of life in the Caribbean. They're part of life in places like Florida, Texas, and you can actually build to withstand them. So despite the fact that there's obviously a lot of bad news about that in the island, it's actually not as big a deal, I think, as people perceive it to be. There's definitely challenges, but there's plenty of opportunity too.
Great. I think we can go on to the next slide. So the overall process of investing or buying property in Puerto Rico is very similar to the mainland. You would choose a location, find an agent who can help you navigate the local regulations and cultural differences, and then you can carry on an inspection of the property, make a down payment, and close the transaction. Most of the business here is done in English and Spanish, so it's pretty comfortable to come navigate the waters here, no matter what language you speak. Though the overall process is very similar, there are a few differences to keep in mind. For example, to list a few, most of you might be expecting a buyer's broker or an agent, but those don't exist in Puerto Rico. another difference is the management fee for your unit does not include the homeowners association fee, which sometimes can be very high. So before you're investing in a property or buying a condo here, these are few of the things you need to do your due diligence about. It is important to conduct an inspection of the property because most of the construction, as we discussed, was done 20 or 30 years ago. And the homes are built with concrete and the finishes generally are below mainland quality. So it is important to bring your own inspector and understand what you are buying. Another difference is the financial process here, which remains similar to the mainland, but where you can obtain a home equity loan or draw from a US line of credit. Though most of the mainland banks are hesitant to finance purchases on the island, there are local options available where we have some major banks which will give you a line of credit based on your mainland account.
And the interest rates are similar to the mainland US?
If you're some of the banks over here, depending on the size of the bank, their interest rates are slightly higher, but the difference isn't that much. Because one of the places where you would end up saving money is probably the origination fee, which are lower in Puerto Rico compared to mainland. The last point on the slide talks about the tax benefits, which I think is one of the biggest attractions of investing on the island. There are two laws, Law 68 and Law 187, which you should take advantage of while purchasing property. Law 68 promotes acquisitions and investment into the housing market, whereas Law 187 exempts buyers from paying property taxes for 5 years, as well as saves costs on certain closing costs, which is really important if you want to come buy a condo here in Puerto Rico versus somewhere else on mainland. You will not be paying property taxes for 5 years.
We'll cover a little bit more in taxes in a minute too.
Right. In the previous slide, I'd mentioned that Puerto Rico doesn't have the concept of a buyer's agent. So what happens on the island is you have individual agents or brokers that have their own neighborhoods in which they control all transactions. So for example, if you want to buy a condo in Condado, which is one of the most popular locations for expats on the island, there will be certain 2 or 3 brokers that will own all the listings for Condado and work with transactions. Another big difference and something to keep in mind is there is a lack of realtor associations or multiple listing services. Because of that, there are no standard contracts for rental or sale properties, and thus it is important to hire your own real estate lawyer while purchasing a property just to make sure the contracts are fine and you're not missing something. A fact which exists in both Puerto Rico and Colombia is the lack of listing data comp sets available online. This is mainly due to the lack of transparency in the seller's market, as well as the public records for older properties. So most of the stock for buying can be found on websites such as Zillow or Clasificados, which is the Puerto Rico information available for selling properties, and that's why you have to go online and visit websites such as Zillow or Clasificados to find condos or even multifamily homes you're interested in buying.
Yeah, it's, I'll get to the Colombia part of the data in a minute, but it is, you know, when I look at it, when I think about it from an Australian perspective, we over in Australia have things like Zillow. So, you know, we have a group called realestate.com.au. We have Domain, which is another big platform. And on there, the data is so rich that you can go in and see, you know, the rental returns for single family homes in the market. You can see, you know, the growth of the properties, both single family homes, commercial. You can see how many transactions, you know, whether that's a data set based off 1,000 transactions or 50 transactions. And that was one thing I found really interesting when I was trying to, you know, get my head around some of these markets, is that there isn't necessarily that level of data which you can base your decisions on. So you really have to pound the pavement a little bit, which can be fun too.
Yeah, based on my experience on the island, the best way is to come here spend a couple of weeks with different realtors and ask them about their opinions, as well as go out and meet people and see what their opinions are on different neighborhoods, and then see what's best for you.
Yeah. So tax incentives, Ankita, you briefly talked about some there before, and just to give everyone a high level, one of the things that's really interesting about Puerto Rico is there are a lot of tax incentives that can be taken at the project level. So if you're doing a tourism project, there's some really interesting tax incentives that Ankita will talk about. And what's important to note for an investor, whether you're investing through a self-directed IRA or whether you're just investing in your personal name, it's important to know, because if you are participating, for example, in a syndicated tourism hotel redevelopment, for example, you might want to know what incentives are available at the project level, which of course will water down to you as an investor, because it's important to know that the people you're investing with know what incentives are available and that they're, trying to get access to as many as possible. So Ankita, do you want to give us a quick run through of these?
Sure. So this slide talks about Act 60, which was previously known as Act 74, which is the tourism tax credits. So as it states, these tax credits are provided for any projects which are related to tourism, which could be hotel, guest house, Airbnb, developments, etc. So there are multiple benefits under this law that remain valid for a 10-year period. These incentives are provided to the owners or the developers of the project, which essentially help increase overall returns. One of the main important incentives provided is that you can get 40% of eligible investments as a tax credit back and then sell it to a third-party investment. Along with that, you also get 90% exemption from all income taxes, as well as any purchase tax available for materials and other construction costs. So essentially what happens is, if you have a project for 100,000 and total development cost, you can get back 40,000 of that as tax credits, which you can then sell to someone and use it to either put it back into the project or give it to your investor.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one, because the reason why they're doing this is one of the things that Puerto Rico's always been great and great in certain areas like manufacturing, particularly for pharmaceuticals, and we're seeing a bit of a resurgence of that now. But they're trying to really bolster their tourism industry. So they're essentially trying to become, a Hawaii of the East, so to speak. And compared to the other Caribbean countries like the Dominican Republic and Jamaica and Barbados, they've really underutilized their natural resources. They've got incredible beaches, a bilingual workforce. As a US citizen, you don't need a passport to travel there. It's US dollars. And they really haven't taken advantage of that. So one of the things they're trying to do is they're trying to encourage investment, particularly in real estate tourism development on the island. So they're providing these incentives, which are at the project level. But of course, as individual investors, we can all access these incentives in some form. So that 40% one is really interesting because, again, using the example Ankita gave, if you had a $10 million project and you could get $4 million of tax credits back, if you sold them for say 85 or 90 cents on the dollar, that money goes back to the project and can either be used to pay back debt, to invest more in the project, or obviously that and then increases the return. So very, very attractive, and they're important to know in case you are investing in one of those types of projects on the island. Go back one.
This is another interesting tax incentive offered throughout the US, but mainly important to investing in Puerto Rico. The opportunity, it's a qualified opportunity zone tax incentives, which have been attracting a lot of investment to the island. Unlike any other US cities where only 20% of the projects are eligible, most of those being low-income housing or community development projects, 98% of the island is eligible as an op zone investment, and the projects can range from luxury housing, tourism, restaurants, etc. What the tax reform essentially does is it reduces the tax rate paid by the fund or the investor from 37.5% to 20% upon a span of 10 years.
So this is important again because some of these, the opportunity zone benefits aren't necessarily applicable for people with IRAs, because IRAs have some additional tax incentives that Bill can talk about a little bit later. But what's important to note is there's a lot of economic activity happening on the island, and there's a lot of investment happening on the island. So yeah, 98% of the island is an opportunity zone, which means that anyone with a capital gain from the sale of real estate, a business, shares, collectibles, any capital gain event, they can defer, reduce, and eliminate their capital gain. So that's creating a lot of excitement on the island and bringing in a lot of investment, which is great to see. Okay, so Colombia. So I've been in Colombia now for 3 years. I'm in Medellin, the second biggest city, and that photo there is in Medellin. Give you a high level, Colombia is close to 50 million people. Spanish obviously is the native language and the official language. Unlike Puerto Rico, there's a large percentage of the population, or a growing percentage, that do speak English, but it's nowhere near the level of Puerto Rico. You might be talking 20% of the population. What's interesting in Colombia is it's a little bit in the US, like Ankita mentioned before, you've got a buyer's agent and a seller's agent. For me, that was a foreign concept. In Australia, we don't have that. We just have one agent who represents both parties, and that's common practice in Colombia. It's not uncommon to have someone have an agent represent them, as well as have two agents in a transaction, but it's quite common to just have one. 3% is the standard commission. 5%, I've seen that happen on commercial deals. It's often quite common on a commercial asset. They'll charge a higher commission, but 3% is common practice. There's no licensing for agents, so technically anyone's an agent. There is no MLS. There's no official governing body, but there is a group called La Lonja who are working to become that official body, and they're running a lot of industry training courses and the like. But for now, there's still no official industry body. Visa eligibility is important to note. So for many of us who are investing as foreigners, depending on the levels of investment you make, you can essentially get access to a Colombian residency path. So 100 times the minimum wage, to give you an example, is about $25,000. 350 times the minimum wage is, let me do the math, is about $80,000 right now. I'm getting a bit confused now, but essentially you can invest, if you invest a little bit over $150,000, $170,000, you can be on a fast track to permanent residency and eventually a citizenship. So if you're looking to diversify and have two passports, that's a potential opportunity. Some other things to know about the Colombian real estate market: financing is almost totally unavailable. So one of the positives is that not having a lot of leverage means that there's not really a bubble in the real estate market. Even for locals, the traditional rates are sort of 10 to 14%, and I'm yet to find anyone who will loan to foreigners. You can do developer financing, so that's just essentially where you're buying off plan, and perhaps over a 2 to 3 year period, you're paying either in installments of 30, 40, 30%, or even down to like 10% down and paying monthly installments until the development's finished, and then a lump sum at the end. So it's important to note that you're not going to be able to get financing. You'll have to bring cash to a certain extent. Exchange rate obviously is an important factor to consider. Right now, the USD is at an all-time high against the peso, so it's a good time to buy. So it's just something important to note for investors, because a great time to buy, but if you're getting returns in Colombia right now and sending them back to the US, well, obviously it's a low return right now. Flipping and renovating is an interesting one. It's really uncommon in Colombia, and there's two core reasons. One is that if you sell an asset within 2 years, it triggers a different capital gains treatment. So if you hold it over 2 years, you pay 10% capital gains tax. But if you don't, you pay full tax, which is over 30%. So it's something that sort of becomes irrelevant. The other thing that's interesting with the flipping, whereas again, using Australia as an example, and I'm sure it's pretty common in the US, you can get a single family home that needs a bit of tender love and care and renovate the property and flip it over a period of 3 to 6 months or 9 months and make a healthy return. Colombians prefer newer builds. They don't like some of the older buildings, with the exception of classic heritage buildings. So there's not as much demand from the local market, and they are 99.9% of the market. So flipping isn't really common practice there. As I previously mentioned, new development is very common, very popular. Colombians do that a lot for several reasons, but I think the majority of the reasons, the biggest reason I would say, is that they really trust in the newer builds more so than some of the older projects. I put down lawyers as a point. I think it's important, if you're a first-time investor in that country, to find yourself a good lawyer. There are many bilingual lawyers in the major cities, and that can be essentially your person representing you if you're a bit uncomfortable operating there, and you will be operating in Spanish. Closing costs, just to give you a feel, 1.45% for the buyer and 1.65% for the seller. Moving money into Colombia, this is important. You should need to set up a brokerage account. Alianza Valores is one good example, but you can also use banks like Bank Colombia. There's a couple of forms you have to do, the foreign exchange declaration forms, and you need to register with a bank, Banco de República. This is important for several reasons, but particularly if you're going down the investment visa path, you want to make sure you're following this process to prove that your funds came from a creditable source, and that you actually brought the funds into the country with your funds. That way you can ensure that you're going to be eligible and not have any issues down the road. So really quickly, I'll run through the process of buying. It's pretty straightforward. Obviously, you find that the property you're looking for, and you agree to the terms. You open that account that I just mentioned. You meet with a real estate attorney. Obviously, you may have already done that beforehand, but you can do it afterwards. You prepare your term sheet with the two parties. You get your certificate. Certificate of Libertad is essentially going to get your titles. The promesa, which is the sales contract, is prepared. You bring your money into the country. You execute the contract at a notary. With 10% is an example. You can put more down, but 10% is the common practice. And then closing, 15 to 60 days is pretty standard. Obviously, you can negotiate like a lot of places. You can do a 6-month close. You can do a 2-week close, but 60 days, 30 days is pretty common. And typically, you'll get your title 3 to 4 weeks after closing. So, common ownership structures in Colombia. So a matricular is a titled apartment. That's the most common way to buy properties. There's another type of investment you can do, which is called acciones fiduciarias, which is essentially shares in a project, but they're managed by a brokerage company. So this is really common in real estate investments where you may be syndicating capital. The next one is a sort of a hybrid of this. It's called acciones fiduciarias con derecho de uso, which means rights to use. So this may happen in like a condo hotel project where maybe you're buying a particular unit. It's in a pool environment where it's getting pooled results in the rental pool, but you also have the right to use it, or you have certain owners' rights. You can obviously invest in an individual's name. You can invest through a local company, a SAS. You can use an offshore company, an LLC, Panamanian SA, for example. And obviously with your self-directed IRA, most people use an LLC. So interestingly, if we, Bill can talk to this a little bit more than what I can, but we've had lots of investors invest through their self-directed IRA. And we also have people who have invested in mixtures of the two, depending on what type of investment it is. It's obviously there's certain rules around that. You can't use the asset. It's purely an investment. It's not a live-in residential property. Obviously, how to invest in your self-directed IRA, will you move your funds to a custodian like Entrust that handles international transactions? You can do it through the custodian, setting up an offshore IRA LLC, and then obviously you got the ongoing management and reporting. So that's the end of the presentation I have on Colombia. I know I skimmed through it pretty quickly there, but Bill, I'll pass back over to you if we want to go through any questions.
Okay, yeah, thanks guys. So I'm going to jump to the questions now. So again, feel free to just enter them into the questions box, and we're going to go through them one by one. And I don't see any yet. All right, here we go. Oops. Okay. This isn't really a question, so I didn't really see the great benefit of Colombia. Also said, by the way, it's spelled Colombia with an O. I didn't really notice the misspelling, but I guess it's possible that it was there. So this isn't so much a question, but Adrian, if you want to talk a little bit about it, the comment is simply didn't really see the great benefit of Colombia.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to really, I think what I would say is the benefits of Colombia is that you've got a booming economy. It's an economy that's not just based on one industry. They've got huge agricultural industry. They've got large oil reserves and natural resources, booming tourism. What I think is really interesting about Colombia, and I was trying not to make this a pitch on Colombia, I was just trying to show people some of the pitfalls more than anything, things to watch out for. But what I think is really interesting about Colombia is that obviously for many reasons it had a bad rap because of past troubles. And because of that, it was avoided by a lot of people for a long time. So it's got this perception issue. But when you actually get down there, it's actually incredible. And there are a lot of opportunities. And tourism, for example, has been growing at 7 to 10% year on year for 10 years plus. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I apologize if I didn't promote Colombia that well. I'm just trying to do a
Yeah, I'm going to point out that we, Entrust, we try and make these presentations to be purely educational without being too promotional. And so they had, Adrian had actually given us a presentation that that had a lot more, promotional about both Colombia and Puerto Rico. And I kicked it back and said, look, we're not trying to sell people on or convince people that they should invest these places. We want to educate them on what they need to know if they're choosing to. So he definitely cut back, driven by my feedback on sort of encouraging or all the benefits and promotional aspects associated with that. So if you want to have that conversation with Adrian, I mean, we've got up on the screen the contact information. So obviously feel free to go crazy with that. I'm having a little issue here with, okay, there we go. I was having a little issue with reading some of these questions the way it was showing up. So here's a question that's how to do due diligence, especially currently not being able to travel. That's a good question. Adrian or Ankita, I'm going to let you guys jump in and see if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so I would say there's a few ways to do it. It's just the same as you would investing out of state in the US. If you're investing in a different state, you can, if you have an agent or a lawyer on the ground, you can obviously utilize them. With technology, you can FaceTime in if you want to do a virtual tours. Ankita was looking at a property the other day in Puerto Rico and filmed it for us, and filmed with a group in, I believe, the Netherlands, who are doing some research for us. So there are ways like that you can do it. But I'd still encourage people to get down and visit the places. I know obviously right now is a tough time to do it, but I think that it is always good to get down and actually go to a place before you actually invest there. But same as you would interstate investing, use someone on the ground. You could just hire someone. You could hire an agent or hire a lawyer on the ground to represent you. You know, pay them by the hour, or technology.
Yeah, to chime in there, most of the brokers, at least on the island, are all conducting virtual tours of their property. So you can book a session in advance and they'll walk through their FaceTime you, or even like set up video cameras around to show you what the property looks like. Another way to do it is, especially on the island, the tourism board and the Discover Puerto Rico, which is a nonprofit that works for the benefit of the island, they're all conducting weekly seminars as to what the status of Puerto Rico is, what's happening with the markets, what are the different trends when it comes to hospitality, real estate. So it's just good to like find out about those conferences and chime into them.
Okay, here's the next question. Fortunately, it looks like this guy's left, but I mean, this will get recorded. So the question that he asks is, I have an interest in the legal aspects of using my IRA for investment overseas, primarily the opportunities for error, tax or legal constraints, the pitfalls, common errors, etc. Please. And so, I mean, when using your IRA to invest in most every country, and Puerto Rico might be an exception to this because it's a colony, but the majority of the time when you want to use your retirement account as an entity to make an investment offshore, that country doesn't recognize our retirement account as an entity that can invest there, because when you make an investment, when you purchase any investment in your IRA, the name of the investment, or the name of the buyer, the name of the purchaser that's going to hold title on whatever investment you make, whether in the United States or offshore, is going to be in the name of the IRA, not in your personal name. So for me, Bill Neville, if I use my IRA to buy a property in Colombia, the name of the entity buying that property, if I use my Entrust account, would be the Entrust Group for benefit of, or just letters FBO, Bill Neville, and then my account number. And most countries aren't going to accept that as an entity that can hold title on a property inside a country. So what you typically have to do is you have to establish some kind of entity that your IRA can invest in, like a local company, so either you establish a corporation in that company, or maybe a bank trust or some kind of entity that your IRA can invest in, and then that entity would hold title on the property. Now, whether you can use an LLC, like an American LLC, would again be country specific. It depends upon the country that you're looking to invest in, as far as whether they'll accept you establish an LLC here in the United States and use that as your entity for holding title on that property. In terms of the rest of your question, primarily the opportunities for error, tax or legal constraints, the pitfalls, common errors. I mean, you were specifically talking about using your IRA. I think that the legal constraints are going to be exactly what I mentioned, needing to establish some kind of entity in that country, or an entity that can hold title on the property. As far as all the other, the opportunities for error, pitfalls, common errors, I mean, those are going to apply whether you're doing it within your own personal savings or using your IRA. I mean, you're going to have the same concerns. So Adrian, Ankita, I don't know if you have anything you want to expand on that. I mean, it was specifically talking about IRAs, but I mean, in terms of the errors, tax or legal constraints, pitfalls, common errors, I mean, you kind of went over that in the presentation. I don't know if there's anything you want to expand upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the same, I wouldn't add too much more. There's certain things that you need to be aware of in Colombia. For example, like there's a withholding tax in Colombia of 7.5%. And US citizens can claim that on if they were investing just personally, they would offset that against their tax in the US, but I'm not sure how that works with an IRA. I'd have to look into that. But
yeah, I mean, that that wouldn't be applicable with an IRA. I mean, an IRA is already a tax sheltered entity. So like any tax benefits that you get, you know, opportunity zones and things like of that nature, you really kind of don't get the benefit with an IRA because the IRA itself is already a tax sheltered entity that's protecting you from capital gains tax and those types of things. Like everything is tax deferred or tax free anyway, depending upon the type of retirement account that you're in. So, I mean, the reason for using your IRA to invest offshore is simply because you feel like it's the best way to grow your retirement account, as opposed to stocks, bonds, or mutual funds, or real estate in the United States, or whatever it is that you want to do. It's based solely on appreciation and revenue generation based on rental income, right? That's the whole purpose of doing it inside a retirement account is you want to grow your retirement account. This gives you the best opportunity to grow your retirement account. Tax advantages and things like that. Again, the IRA just as an entity is going to give you tax advantages. So any additional tax advantages that certain countries provide or certain opportunity zones or things like that just become non-applicable whenever you're talking about a retirement account.
Yeah, so in this case, I think the withholding tax is not an advantage, it's a disadvantage. But one example that could come up would be if you had an asset in Colombia, for example, you decided to sell the asset in 5 years' time. Well, their capital gains tax, they'll charge you, even if you are into an IRA. It's only 10%, but it's something to be aware of because they will charge you that in Colombia before the money leaves. There's little things. There are little things.
Yeah.
It's a case by case.
Yeah. And you know, the person asked the question on general offshore real estate. I mean, we're obviously talking about two places in specific, but I mean, it's going to be, like you said, case by case basis and depending upon the country you're looking at. Okay, so next question. Can I trade Forex using a self-directed IRA? Can I use my own Forex broker? Thanks. So you can trade Forex using your self-directed IRA. As far as using your Forex broker, you have two options. You can, assuming the broker allows you to establish an account in the name of your IRA, so then you would submit you would have to establish the account in the name of your retirement account, not in your personal name. Then submit, you know, I guess the invoice or investment documents for us to send the cash to that Forex broker. And then you can make trades through that broker, but any revenue that's generated from that has to flow back to your IRA. You as a person can't have access to be able to withdraw the money personally. It all has to be held in the name of the IRA, and it can only be returned back to the IRA. That's one option. The other option is to do it through an LLC, where you, instead of having your IRA hold title or open the account in the name of the IRA with the Forex broker, you open you establish an LLC, name your IRA as the member of the LLC, and then establish your Forex account under that LLC, and then you can do the trading, and then the money would have to flow from the IRA to the LLC from the LLC to the Forex broker, and then when you get Adrian and Ankita, I don't know if you guys are moving your mouse, but I didn't take control away from you guys, and it's kind of messed me up here. So if you can try not to do that, it keeps moving on me.
Okay.
So trade, to finish my thought, you would use the LLC as a pass-through entity, and then that would become the trader or the holder of the Forex account. But the money would have to flow from the Forex account back to the LLC, and then from the LLC back to the IRA. Next question, can you do anything for Canadians who want to purchase through their RRSP? No, I'm sorry, we can't. We're strictly a custodian for IRAs, 401ks, health savings account, and Coverdale educational savings account. So Canadian plans do not, we're not custodians of Canadian plans. So here's one for you guys. So there is no buyer's commission with a question mark. So they're confirming that there's no commission for buyers.
Yeah, in Colombia, it's just the commission seller paid, and usually it's just one agent. Every so often there may be a couple of agents involved, but there's no buyer's commission.
Okay. How does one find out about hotel resort investment opportunities?
I mean, that's an interesting one. I think, to be honest, the easiest way to do it is to start going down the Google rabbit hole. Unfortunately, I've yet to come across. I have a good sense of where they are in certain countries because I've been working in that industry, but I haven't been able to come across a platform that is like a Zillow hotel investment opportunities. I would personally look at, certain markets that you want to look at, whether it's Puerto Rico and you want to do a Google search of, invest in a hotel in Puerto Rico, or that would be the easiest way to do it, because unfortunately there isn't a one-stop shop, so to speak, for finding these deals. It's an interesting niche that's actually in the market.
Yeah, another option would be to first find out which funds or private equity companies invest in hotels, going on their websites and seeing if they have any new opportunities available.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is if you're doing it in trying to invest in a project, if you want to buy an entire hotel, well, then that's another thing. You can obviously reach out to commercial brokers and look for off-market deals or on-market deals. Yeah.
Okay, and also, Adrian, Ankita, I while you were answering that question, I removed your keyboard and mouse control, so you should be able to do what you want to do on your end. Okay, so here's the next one. It's for you. It says simply, I was told by someone there has been some recent restructuring at Lifeafar that someone should be careful of.
Yeah, so we did do a restructure during COVID-19. We had to let go of about 50 staff, unfortunately, and we also had to stop managing some properties in certain cities. So we have had a restructure, but it's nothing for anyone to be worried about. But we did have a restructure during the start of the COVID period.
As did many people. Okay, next question. Does Puerto Rico guarantee those tax benefits, or can they change the rules in the middle of the game?
Most of the tax benefits are applicable from the day you receive the decree. So if you have a project, you can apply with Hacienda, one of the governmental organizations, to receive a tax decree. So even if the regulations are changed afterwards, once you have the decree, you will be eligible for all those benefits.
Okay, the next one is a comment that simply says Puerto Rico had many benefits, but I'm sure they meant has. I live in Puerto Rico for the tax purposes and everything is accurate. So there's a little feedback for you. All right, next one. What offerings are currently available for Puerto Rico via Entrust Connect? I don't think we have anything on there right now, but Adrian, have you guys put anything on Entrust Connect yet?
No, we haven't. We do have a Puerto Rico offering. It's funny, we're not advertising it yet because we have it under a non-disclosure, but we can put it up on Entrust Connect, which we should talk about after
yeah,
this.
we'll talk about that. But yeah, Jeff, I don't think we have anything on there at this particular moment, but log in and check it out. Since Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, are taxes filed and reported on mainland? And then just as thinking of anonymity.
Yeah, that would depend on where your residency is. So even if you purchase a property in Puerto Rico and you're a resident of, say, Boston, you would pay taxes accordingly. Though Puerto Rican residents or Puerto Rican investors, if you live for Puerto Rico in 6 months, you can claim residency and then receive special tax benefits.
Okay, cool. So I'm not going to let you guys in. I'm going to read this question, but then tell them why you can't answer it, which is, can you give an idea of total returns for syndicated projects in Puerto Rico and Colombia? Also total returns for rental properties. So Rich, these are educational investments, educational webinars only. We actually don't let our presenters talk about returns, but there's their contact information right there. You got their email and their phone number. You are free to contact them directly and ask that question, but I'm sorry, I can't let them answer that on this on this webinar. This next one, I'll let you, you guys can add some information, but again, you guys, we've talked about sort of what you can and can't say. It says simply, can you talk about your new Provenza project?
I won't get into returns. I would just say that we're doing a project there that is a hybrid of a hotel versus Airbnb. So what it is instead of owning shares in a syndicated hotel project, you're buying an apartment, but it has the benefit. So it's just a different ownership structure. I'm trying to be careful with my words because I don't want to be too right. but it's a different ownership structure, similar to like a condo hotel where, you, Bill, Neville own apartment 202, but it's in a building that's designed for short-term rentals and has the features of a hotel. So it has, room service, bars, restaurants, things like that, but you actually have a 2-bedroom apartment. So it's that we're trying to do a hybrid of hotel, best of the hotel meets the best of Airbnb.
All right, good. Well done. Good answer. And obviously, again, Trevor, if you want to hear, some more specifics about that, you can contact them directly. From a transaction standpoint, what tends to be the biggest point of friction in closing a real estate deal, either in Puerto Rico, Colombia, or elsewhere offshore? I'm gonna just point out what I had mentioned earlier, which is that from an IRA standpoint, the issue around who can hold title on the property and whether you have to structure an entity in that country or can you do it as through an LLC is usually the biggest issue that we run into. And Adrian, Ankita, I'm gonna let you answer from there.
So I'll do Colombia first, and Ankita can do Puerto Rico. Biggest friction, I would say, just from my experience, the biggest friction is just often something you'd get in any market, but probably more so in Latin America, dealing with the sellers. And I'm probably, and Ankita, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming it can be similar in Puerto Rico with island time a little bit. Sometimes just the negotiation tactics are a little bit different. So we've been lucky that we have bilingual agents who are Colombians, often dual citizens with the US. So just working between cultures for me has been where we see the most friction, so to speak.
I agree. It's essentially the timing, which can be the most frustrating part of doing a transaction on the island too.
Yeah, and we have a document, a white paper that we put together that's just generally dealing with things to know about doing offshore real estate. And one of the things is like the time frame can often be a lot longer than what you run into in the United States. So just be prepared for that. So that applies in general. So here's a follow-up question. Someone says, also, when moving money to Puerto Rico or Colombia, does it leave a paper trail here on mainland?
Yeah.
I mean, a paper trail, like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, and the person left the chat, but I'm guessing they're talking about, I'm not sure. I mean, if you transfer money from, whether you're doing it inside a retirement account or not, I mean, there's probably an aspect of needing to move the money to a bank there. Like I know you had talked about that in Colombia. I mean, that's obviously going to leave a paper trail. So I would say yes, you're probably looking at leaving a paper trail.
Yeah, for sure. In Colombia, it's very strict on anti-money laundering, so it's very rigid to move money in and out. So you have to follow the processes. For example, if I want to send money to a friend of mine in the US from Australia, I can just send a wire transfer. In Colombia, it's not quite that easy. You've generally got to move the money in and have a special form for, just to make sure accounts don't get frozen and things like that. So a few more checks and balances in place.
Okay, next one, which cities / locations in Colombia would you recommend for rental real estate investments?
It depends on what market you're going after. I personally would say Medellin and Cartagena. The reason being Medellin's the second biggest city. It's 4.5, 5 million people. It has multiple industries. We as foreigners barely make up not even 1% of the market. So it's not reliant on just tourism, for example. Cartagena's, I forget the exact number, I think it's close to 1 million people, has a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there's huge demand with Cartagena in terms of tourism from people from Bogota, from Medellin, from Cali, so a lot of domestic tourism, but also it's a big port city. So they would be my two, but there are others, but they would be my two.
Okay, nice. This one's more for me. If a renter pays monthly rent to my investment property, when does that money need to be returned into the IRA LLC account? Monthly or once a year? What fees are involved in international transfers? So there's no, you personally can't hold the money yourself, but you can hold it inside an LLC for as long as you want. There is no mandate on when it needs to be returned to your IRA. other than once you reach age 72, then you're subject to required minimum distributions, and then you have to start taking withdrawals, and so you might need to move the money back into then. But from a standpoint of, we have to report a fair market value of your asset and your account to the IRS on an annual basis. So from a standpoint of reporting the value of your account, any money that you're holding into an LLC needs to be reported back to Entrust in terms of a fair market value, the fair market value of the LLC, so that we can report that to the IRS. But you know, I have a couple rental properties inside my IRA, not here in the United States, and I actually have a property manager that holds the cash for me, rather than, I don't use an LLC, but I have the property manager who holds the cash, and then I put the money back into my IRA. I don't know, it's been a couple of years. I don't do it on any particular basis. So there's no requirement that you have to return the money from your LLC, or if you're doing offshore, whatever entity established, to your IRA on any particular time frame. But you just can't take the withdrawal yourself and use it for personal use. It has to come back to the IRA first before you can take a withdrawal. Okay. Okay. So the person who asked about the anonymity says, by the way, I'm not looking at doing anything illegal, looking for legal anonymity. And then LOL. Okay. How difficult is it getting approval, permits, etc. in Puerto Rico? So in getting approvals, permits, etc. in Puerto Rico.
It is definitely takes longer than the mainland because, for example, if you want to get a building permit, especially in the old city, you have to go through multiple agencies, and all of them have to approve your permit, approve your project before they give you a permit. So it depends on where you're building or where you're buying on the island, but it does take up to 6 months to maybe a year to get your permits.
Okay. Next question, which is more just a comment again, says, to Bill's point, I'm very close to closing with a US LLC here in Colombia. So they are using a US LLC in Colombia, although I noticed they did add a caveat, says, but it's been difficult. All right, thanks for the feedback there, Barton. Does Puerto Rico give preferential treatment to tenants versus landlords?
Not that I am aware of. We personally mostly just deal with commercial projects. So it's a little difficult for me to answer, but I haven't heard of it being preferential either way.
Okay. Somebody says, I have $200K to invest from the sale pending at the end of October of a commercial building in the US. It is not IRA money. Is it better to consider 1031 exchange and look to buy in Port Opportunity Zone, I'm guessing they're saying Puerto Rico, or pay the taxes, or pay the taxes in the US, then have money that is cash for Colombia project with Lifeafar? Huh. It's kind of advising.
I won't give my advice, but I'll just say one thing about a 1031 versus, say, an op zone. A 1031, the benefit of a 1031 is you can roll and forever keep rolling your money, right? So you have it, you buy a place for 200,000, you have a gain of 200, you roll that in, and it just keeps deferring that tax forever until you eventually exit. You've got a 6-month window, but one of the downsides is that you have to put the entire investment amount in, whereas with an opportunity zone, you only have to put in the gain or part of the gain. So if you had a property bought for 200,000 and you sold it for 400, you don't have to invest the whole 400. You invest just the 200. The benefit for the US government is eventually you'll have to pay that capital gains tax. So you will eventually pay that tax with a drop down. But obviously the long-term benefit for investors in an op zone is that if they hold it for over 10 years and then exit, it's totally capital gains tax free. And to the question about Colombia versus Puerto Rico, I'll leave that one for now.
Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Puerto Rico is included as a list of coordinated territories for 1031 exchange.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one just says, will Lifeafar lower minimum investments for Entrust customers?
No, I mean, look,
don't feel compelled to commit to anything.
Yeah, we pretty much can't. So we do most of the deals that we do. We're now doing projects where we do, like, you buy a titled apartment and they are the price of the apartment, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. But the ones where we're doing syndicated projects, we do them with, under the SEC 506C accredited investor exemption, and once we've set them, we've set them. We can't go and tweak it. If we do, we have to change it for everyone. So, but we have a variety of, depending on how many projects we have at the one time, they're not always going to be the same minimum amount.
Yeah. Next question is, do you have projects that they can invest in for around 20K?
One, 25.
Okay. Next question says, can you do this in Canada? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if they're asking you if you can do investing in Canada, or if they're asking me if they can do IRAs in Canada, but I already answered that no, like we don't custody Canadian retirement accounts. As far as like, are you guys looking to do any investing in Canada or branch up to there? You can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, we're not looking at moving into Canada as a market, but we do obviously have a lot of Canadian investors, predominantly in Colombia.
Okay. Somebody who asked a question earlier said, I apologize, this question is off the topic of IRA self-direction. I just want to clarify that we do these educational webinars about, I mean, yeah, some of them are very specific to self-direction, but this one is just generally offshore real estate investing. So, you know, we're bringing from a standpoint of if you want to invest inside your retirement account, but we specifically mentioned to Adrian and Ankita in terms of doing their presentation that if somebody comes to you and says, I'm looking to invest in Colombia or Puerto Rico, what do I need to know? We didn't specify that it has to be in an IRA. So, you know, we're providing educational information. Obviously, you know, we hope that people are interested in opening retirement accounts with us, doing in retirement accounts, but that's not the point of this. The point of this is to educate. So if you have questions about investing offshore or investing wherever that's not specifically IRA related, that's fine. We're okay. Okay. I got moved here a second. I lost my place. Give me a second. Sorry, everybody. Okay. What happened here? Okay. So Adrian, how does Colombian peso devaluation over time affect property values?
So I'll just give you from my experience. I mean, I'm not an expert in the currency, so to speak, but the 10-year average, and now may have changed this last 6 months because there's been a lot of fluctuations, but before that, the 10-year average was about $1 USD was buying 2,600 COP, Colombian pesos. Right now, $1 US is buying 3,700, 3,800. Predominantly, one of the big drivers of that is oil prices. Colombia is a big exporter of oil, and obviously with travel right now being right down, and just general use of oil around the world down and prices down, that's impacting it heavily. But in the last 10 years, I'm not going to get exactly right, but the strongest the peso has been is about $1 buying 1,800, and the weakest has been is $1 buying 4,000. The properties in Colombia pretty consistently go up between 4 to 7% annually. So the exchange rate, it really comes down to like if we're doing an investment in Colombia, we measure all the returns, everything just in pesos. We don't take into account the currency risk. The currency risk, obviously, the individual investor has to take in, but it can provide some good opportunities too. So we do our forecast based on Colombian pesos, what the returns are going to get in pesos, appreciation in pesos, and then the idea, of course, is to sell it and again in pesos. And then there will be investors, for example, who will sell an asset and then just leave the money in Colombia until the timing's right for them to move the money back and take advantage of the exchange rate. So I don't know if that answered the question, but
I mean, if you want to, if you need to expand on that, there's Adrian's contact info. And so I'm just going to read something that really, there's somebody that Trevor who's really pushing to Canada. It says, can you develop a relationship in Canada? Lifeafar should speak to Olympia Trust so you can market to Canadians. I'm gonna just leave that as a comment. Can you do a 1031 exchange into Puerto Rico? I think you just mentioned that you don't think you can.
Yeah, no, you can't. I remember that too, that they don't have 1031 exchanges. So the option is the opportunity zone instead.
Yeah,
Yep.
correct. I just confirmed that.
Have you seen any unintended consequences, both positive and negative, of PR Act 20 and Act 22?
That's a broad question, but when it comes to real estate, what it has done is, because of the number of people moving in here, it's created a higher demand for housing, and because of that also increase the property prices. So that's all I can talk about.
Okay.
It's interesting. So, Ankita, wasn't there talk about changing Act 2022 to make it mandatory to buy a property?
Yes, so if I'm not sure which one it is, but I think if you want to declare yourself as a Puerto Rican resident, so that's Act 22, you'll have to purchase a property here, and it can't be a secondary home. So it has to be your primary home.
So just to give people on the webinar, Act 2022 essentially is for US citizens who want to move to Puerto Rico for 6 months of the year, and they can actually get it down to 5 months of the year if they spend one of those months not on the mainland. You can actually get your tax significantly down. I believe it's down to 0% for certain items and 4% for corporations. So there's consultants, attorneys in Puerto Rico who specialize in that, but it's really again, for me as an Australian, it's not important, but for American citizens, it's a great way to minimise your tax burden. So I'd look into that if it's applicable to you.
Okay, Canada still continues to be a hot topic. The person says, I think neglecting Canada is a missed opportunity, then followed up by somebody saying, don't buy in Canada, too many taxes and everything rent controlled, at least in Quebec. Okay. Does Lifeafar offer property management services in Colombia for an investment property?
We do. So we're trying to do more. One of the things we found in Colombia, something I should have mentioned in the presentation actually, is obviously with tourism and Airbnb everywhere in the world becoming huge, there was government crackdown, like there have been in a lot of cities, where the government in Colombia made it to use your property on Airbnb less than 30 days, you need to have a tourism license. To get that tourism license, you need to have everyone in your building, or at least 70% of the building, agree to have it like written into the bylaws and apply for the license. So there's only certain buildings in cities that can legally do Airbnb if you want to do a short-term rental, that is. If you want to do a long-term rental, so back to the question, do we do it? Yes, we do short-term rental, long-term rental, but the best ones are definitely the ones where you can legalize building.
Okay, last couple things here. How much time is allowed from sale date of a capital gain property and putting the gain into an opportunity zone?
It's 6 months, but this year they've made some additional extensions. I know that people who had gains earlier on this year could go all the way to the end of 2020, but traditionally it's 6 months, similar to a 1031 exchange.
Okay, and then the same person who asked the question just has a couple of pieces of feedback, and then I don't see any more questions, but he says, I beg to differ on the 1031 exchange into Puerto Rico. The good news is a U.S. taxpayer can 1031 foreign property into Puerto Rico, and then says you can't 1031 back into the USA, but you can 1031 into other foreign countries. So looks like there's some debate.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't profess to be an expert in 1031s. I just know that when I first started working in Puerto Rico, that there wasn't a 1031 ability at the time, but they were looking at doing their own one there. But I would say do a little bit of extra research, because again, I don't profess to be an expert, but I do know that the opportunity zones obviously tick most of those boxes as well.
Okay. All right. Well, that was the last of the questions. So there were some good ones there. I appreciate again Adrian and Ankita for taking the time. This was really interesting information, And obviously, if you had Lifeafar's contact information up there for the majority of that, so feel free to contact them if you have any specific questions around some of the investments that they're doing. And obviously, if you want to do it inside an IRA, then we can help with that process, and we're happy to do so. So again, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks Adrian and Ankita, and everybody stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you,
Thank
Bill.
you, Bill.